Now we invite all the morning presenters to come back on stage for our Q&A session. So please come back. And while they're coming, let's introduce the moderator of this Q&A, Turri. Turri resides in Orlando, Florida, with his wife and 3 daughters. Is a worker at the Peace and Knowledge Spiritist Center of Orlando. Professionally, Dr. Turri is the Director of Audiology for the Village's health system. Let's give a round of applause to all our speakers and moderator.
Thank you, gentlemen or ladies. I really appreciate it. Thank you to all of you for being here for the recap from this morning. Thank you for asking me to assist. And mostly, thank you to each of you for your contributions, your hard work. And I tried to pick the really hard ones, okay? Nobody's laughing. All right, here we go. So I tried to grab questions for each of you. We may have some overlap. The first one was addressed to Peter, but I think Mr. Christie could handle this too, because I think it could tie into peacemaking, since it's about relationships. All right, so but we'll start with Peter, which is right here. The question is, why is it usual that one spirit is more evolved than the other spirit in a human marriage? And that's why I said peacemaking could tie into this as well. But go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay. So the question is, why is it usual?
Why is it usual that one spirit is more evolved than the other in a human marriage? So, like, why are the wives always smarter than the men?
Well, one way to think about that, yeah. That's right. It's usually the husband that's least involved, right? Yeah. One way to think about it is a relationship, a serious relationship, is another opportunity to learn. And so if both partners are absolutely equal in all ways, then there's not as much learning that's likely to occur as a result. It can be certainly based upon the previous history of that relationship, what has gone on between 2 individuals. It's a little tricky to narrow it down to any one thing in particular, except that, again, it's sort of an opportunity for 2 individuals to help one another. Sometimes in couples and in relationships, the person who has a little more, perhaps is a little more evolved, or perhaps has some more responsibility, is indirectly teaching the other, but it depends. Did you want to elaborate? Or?
Perfect. Wonderful. Do you guys all want to comment on the question? Or just, yes?
What happens when there are 2 wives?
Exactly.
Just a quick question.
I thought of that as soon as I said it, so thank you for correcting me. The next question would be for Mr. Alvarez. This is an online question. It comes from Brazil. And it basically reads that with the loss of family, we have people still on the earth that talk about relatives that have passed, young children specifically. Maybe they passed when they were 10, and it's been 15 years, and now they say they would be 25 years now. But the question really comes down to is, how do you help people still grieving death and counting the years with family that they've lost, like they haven't moved past it? How would you recommend helping with that?
I think the answer to that is how you help anyone that's going through a difficult time with, and I think Jesus gives us the answer to that, and that's to support them with love, with compassion, with fraternal assistance. If they're able to go to a Spiritist center, I would recommend that they go to hear the gospel, to take classes, to do the fraternal counseling, which is a very particular kind of counseling based on the Spiritist doctrine. And I think those are the things that we can do to help anyone, whether it is someone that's grieving the loss of a loved one, or someone who's having difficult time at work, or having a difficult time with their partner.
Thank you very much. Suzana, this one's for you. How can we separate the line between tolerating one another and acceptance versus being too tolerant and perhaps putting ourselves in danger of being hurt? When do you stop tolerating and then, or start protecting, in other words? Where's the line?
Well, when we were speaking about tolerance, we weren't speaking about abuse. We were speaking about something much more simple, such as tolerating differences and being able, for example, to tolerate someone that is different than you and yet continue to be friends with that person, respect that person. A lot of times we see friends who disagree in a particular issue, and because of that disagreement and the lack of tolerance for difference and the lack of respect for the idea that we can think differently and still love one another, then that creates problem. Of course, the law of preservation, the instinct tells us that we should protect ourselves. So by no means we are saying that people should stay in relationships that are a threat to their lives. That's not what I'm saying, nor is what Spiritism actually says. And the difference, and then so there is tolerance is, I think goes back to what you were saying, those 10% learn to see that there is a possibility of something different than what you think or the way that you are. And you work on acceptance of this possibility. You may not accept the person's idea, but we need to work on accepting that there are other possibilities and other things different than our own way of seeing the world.
Thank you so much. Heather, do you see mindfulness practices being introduced into public schools as spiritual progress occurs? And what other methods do you suggest?
Mindfulness, you said?
Yes, is mindfulness practices being introduced into public schools?
Yeah, it is. I don't have a lot of experience, with that to comment too much, but I have seen a lot of articles being shared, and some of them that I've looked at. Mindfulness is something that people are, ironically to say, but becoming more conscious of, more aware of the importance, and basically because of the need for it, because we are our attention is taken in so many directions all day, every day. And so as we adults recognize the need to become more mindful and perhaps put the brakes on what we have set up for our children to inherit from us in our own tendencies with technology and information, then it is being addressed in the schools. I know that children are starting to learn not only about mindfulness, but practices and how to be more in the moment, so to speak, but really,
We were, my wife and I were speaking yesterday as we were looking at monuments and playing tourist, how much mention of God is in so much of our early history as a country. And now you don't talk about it, you don't see it in school. So my 2 cents on this is, a lot of that's tied together. If we don't spend a lot of time talking about God, or it's not okay to talk about God, how then do you share that example of Christ on a daily basis? And I think all that ties to mindfulness in some ways. That's just my 2 cents. Like, it's not okay as a society to talk about it anymore.
Can I chime in?
Please.
So I do work in the field of education, and I can say that a lot of schools have successfully been employing and leveraging meditation rooms, mindfulness moments. And it's important to say that these are, they are not religious pieces. They're just a way of teaching kids what educators call self-regulation, which is the ability to regulate your own emotions, to know how to wire your brain and know, oh my God, I'm getting a little excited. I should take a moment to breathe, because there is a correlation between the physical body and the emotional state. So, we did this here today, right? Edward led us to a prime example of that, of taking a moment to breathe and calm ourselves down and revert the natural physical indicators that lead towards anxiety and so forth. So it's been employed to schools, and it's great, because if we learn that at a young age, then it's more likely that those habits will be developed in a way that it stays as we get older, and therefore leads to more congeniality, the ability to just be okay with people and do what Suzana was saying, which is we can think differently and not get worked up about it.
Absolutely.
May I add
Yes,
just a little piece?
please.
Leon Denis, in the book Posthumous Work, has a wonderful chapter on education, and he uses precisely these words. Education comes as we learn to govern our emotions. So mindfulness allows us to understand, to stop, to understand the contents that are coming from our unconscious and manifesting in our lives, and gives us a chance to deal with our feelings and to learn how to educate our feelings. A lot of times we're acting and reacting, as I was speaking before, based on all this content that it is in our unconscious and is governing our lives day to day without us having any awareness. I also would like to suggest the book Mediumship and Consciousness, where there is a big piece, is a book written by the project Manuel Filomeno de Miranda, and there, for whoever is interested, there is a big piece on the role of meditation and in the spiritist content.
Thank you so much. Daniel, this one's for you. Given the climate situation and the changes we're seeing that you spoke of, is there a spiritist perspective or a spiritist view that you can share with us on population control and how it ties into managing the resources of the planet?
Yeah, this is an interesting social topic that has been discussed, I think, for over 200 years with Malthus, right? The idea that that population is growing exponentially, but that they were concerned back in the 1700s that our resources were not. I think that from even without going to a spiritual take on things, I think we can say that we've learned that technology has greatly advanced since then, which allows us to produce a lot more. So from a scientific perspective, I think we've answered that question, that we are not worried about enough resources on the planet. We're worried about the misuse of said resources, right? I think that if we take a step further and look spiritually, I think we ought to remind ourselves that God is in control. And whereas we may not have a good sense of what's happening and might get very anxious about it, no doubt there is an incredible spiritual planning taking place as to the capacity of the earth to sustain life, right? Or the right quantity of people. Otherwise, it would be reckless of our spiritual mentors and even God to send, 10 people in an elevator that only fit 6, right? It just doesn't make sense that God would do such a thing, right? And so I think that we can rest assured that the population of the earth will continue to increase. We have some hints of that in some of our books in Spiritism. It was talked about in some of the books, some of the Manuel Filomeno de Miranda, for instance, in that the population of Earth and some of Chico Xavier were like 5 or 6 times bigger than the incarnate population. So the total population of spirits orbiting the Earth's influence spiritually is far superior than the ones that are here. And so we can expect to continue to grow in population, which makes it even more pressing for us to know how to manage our resources equitably and understand that we have a fair share that behooves us, of course, and that we can have enough for everybody and still have plenty to go around. So I'm looking forward for us to continue to have these conversations where we earnestly ask ourselves, what are the things that we can do to ensure that everybody gets enough? Because it could be, and I think we see that socially nowadays, that there is some tension about some folks feeling that some have too much and others have too little. So, of course, socially we have to work this out, but I wouldn't be too worried spiritually. from a population control, because my belief in God dictates that there is a greater plan that I might not be privy to, but no doubt far wiser and smart people on the other side are taking care of that.
Thank you so much. Mr. Christie, this one is for you. What if 10% isn't enough? So I think what I inferred from this is, look, I'm trying, but this person, there's just no resolving this issue. Like, when your first attempt at trying fails, how can you help? Give us some tips on how to keep going.
Well, peacemaking is really no different from forgiveness in this way. It's not really, you're not asking someone else to make peace. You're asking yourself to make peace with the other person. So the idea is that we really need to allow the relationship that Jesus asked us to build with each one of us, the love that we have for our neighbor, the forgiveness, the reconciliation that we have. This requires us to let people in. And when we lock them out, we've gone to 0%. And of course, maybe 10% might be too little, actually. Is it too little or too much? I forgot. I'm not good at math, so I have a problem with that.
I'd say it's a start.
But the idea is it's just a start. It's just a start because, you think of even the larger picture of conflicts between countries. I mean, it seems so clear. You pick up a newspaper and you say, this country is wrong. But there are people in that country and they have concerns and we're not able to see them. And this is where the lack of peacemaking comes in, because there's no way of getting in there. There's no way, because we just see it's right or it's wrong. And certainly I look at my own life. When I was a teenager, I thought one way. Go back to Daniela's quote from St. Paul. We grow, and if we realize that each day we're changing, where does that change come from? That change comes from our interaction with each other and our ability to take something in from the outside and do something with it and really change and create peace between us and other people.
Thank you very much. Heather, here's another one for you. The person asks, didn't we experience better ages in the past or previous civilizations like the Greeks and the Romans?
Didn't we experience better ages?
Better ages, like as far as
Civilization.
Yes. In terms of equality and your topic.
I think that
It's debatable, yeah?
yeah, it's debatable. I mean, if you look way back, different ages, I'm sure we could point out some things that compared to now seem better. Maybe life being more simple. A lot of us struggle with, we all ask each other, how are you? And we're like, oh, I'm good, I'm busy. That's like a typical answer because we're all just like running. So maybe the simplicity of life, not being concerned with so many complex things. But, when I just see progress overall. I think that we are, we're growing and, anywhere from the sciences to the arts. And there was so much violence in the past for all the violence that we have today, I think that we are slowly moving away from our more animalistic tendencies. And I don't know, maybe somebody else here wants to chime in, but I overall think we're better
I think so.
today.
Adrian wanted to contribute.
And just because I'm a lawyer, from the legal perspective, we enjoy rights, at least on paper, at a level that's unprecedented in human history. If we talk about tragedies in the world, one of the silver linings of the Second World War, which was arguably the most bloody and horrific war in our world's history, but it led to this wonderful framework of human rights, and rights that go beyond any kind of rights that we could imagine, in 1776 when our founding fathers created our Constitution. So much so that a country like Germany, which perpetrated this horrible thing through the Holocaust, is now a country, if you walk in Berlin, you see on the river their Declaration of Rights in glass etched, and they have a dome over their parliament that's of glass that symbolizes transparency. And so I would agree with you, Heather, that our world continues to advance legally, scientifically, and it's just a matter of time before everyone catches up. So I don't necessarily agree with the premise that the world was a better place 200, 300 years ago.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, Daniel.
Can I chime in?
Yes.
So I was going to say, besides indoor plumbing, ice cream, air conditioning, and cars, which I think make the point by ourselves that we're better off today than we were in the past, I would say that I think that we have this novel, this nostalgic idea that maybe things were better, because I think that we lived in the illusion of prosperity. I think we lived more in groups that were more homogeneous, and because we didn't have technology, we didn't know of each other, we had the illusion that life was better because we were in pockets, right? You didn't really know a lot of people outside your neighborhood, and they tend to look the same, and they had the same habits, and they did the same things, and they went to the same restaurant. So we had the idea that things were more peaceful. But now with technology and travel, we're mixing up, and we're seeing things that we didn't see back then. We now have access to knowledge that we didn't see back then. So it's only normal that we feel a little bit uncomfortable because we're dealing with the other. We don't know what the other was. Our parents didn't grow up in our times, and they were not exposed to this kind of diversity of thought that we have. And it's hard to deal, like folks were saying, with people who think differently than you. And so we have the illusion sometimes that things tend to be a little bit more raucous, but I think that you have to mix it up before we find and settle down. So I think it's just a new learning process. I'm very confident that things are getting better. I think that never in the history of humankind have we had so many people working for others, and so many nonprofits, so many people dedicated to helping others. So I would say that it's great times to live in. The question is, can we adapt to the different?
Thank you.
And I will just add that I think as we are going through the transition, right, it comes to a time where God says, enough is enough. Whether you guys want it or not, we are moving forward. And so we are witnessing a number of challenges, but we have to remember that we are prepared to face them. We have the resources to face them. And kind of going back to my lecture a little bit, it is very easy to be good among good. So, question for reflection is, can you be good among the ones not so good? And so this is really what we be invited to do at this moment. So we are definitely, there is no question that we are moving forward. Sometimes we analyze the world from our very narrow perspective of the present moment. We are unable to see the future, and we forget to really take a good look at the past in order to have an understanding of where we are in our evolution. But the law is one of progress, so we are moving forward. If you have any questions, please direct to God.
Thank you very much. Adrian, this one's for you. The question here is, we all hope to see our loved ones again when we discarnate. But since time runs differently in the spiritual realm, what happens if my loved one reincarnates by the time I arrive in the spiritual world?
Is it on? I think that's a really good question. I think first I would start by saying that the bonds of love and the bonds of affection endure. And just because our loved ones pass away to the spirit world doesn't mean that they stop loving us, and it doesn't mean that we stop loving them. But we also have to understand that we're immortal souls. So while maybe we don't coincide exactly when we discarnate, we can't stop but hoping that because those bonds of affection endure, that we will find a way to come together again in the form of what Peter was talking. Maybe they come back as our grandchild. Maybe they come back as our best friend. And we also have to remember that we feel our loved ones, even now. You know, my grandmother, who is someone that I was incredibly close to, is someone that I dream about often. And I can't tell you for sure that when I dream of her that it is her there with me, but I want to believe it is, because every time I dream of her, I feel this intense joy. And it's as if in my dreams I'm crying and I say, "Grandmother, it's been so long since I've seen you, but it's so good to see you." And so those, whether it's actually her spirit, it's a sign anyway of my affection for her. And I know that the bond that she and I created in this life was formed from many lives. And that bond will continue because love endures.
Thank you so much. This one is not directed towards any one of you. So whoever has an overwhelming desire to tackle this one, I think it's a great question. But I wouldn't want to be the one answering it. It says, on one hand, I'm the only one responsible for my inner transformation. But on the other hand, my self-interest can be the obstacle to that inner transformation. How do we reconcile these seemingly contradicting concepts? Okay, we found a volunteer.
If our self-interest is conflicting with our desire to progress, that's the question, right?
Yes.
Humility. We need to embrace humility. A lot of times we think we know what is the best way to do things, but at the same time, if we're presented with circumstances that actually make us confront the way we think, we have to be humble enough and open enough to realize that maybe our perspective about ourselves and about the world around us needs some change, or at least some re-examination. So it's really, I think, a question that's connected to the need to embrace humility and overcome pride.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think Daniel has a bit he wants to add.
If you give me a microphone, I will not let him go. I think the question is one of priorities, because if somebody says, I want to work on my spiritual evolution, but my self-interest is getting in the way, I think we have to recognize that that person already understands that it's really not their self-interest to listen to their self-interests. Metaphysical, right? They already understood that their self-interests are not or should not be the priority, and that's why the conflict comes from. So in our conscience, as the good spirits tell us, we already know what we kind of ought to do, and we are, I think, all in this process where we're recognizing that we've got to make this change. We just don't know how to, because it's really hard to deprioritize that which we see and feel, because we have been trained for generations, for incarnations, to believe that what is what we can see and touch. And so to unplug ourselves from the matrix is really hard, right? But it takes repetition, and it takes learning and trial and saying. So I think that wrestling with the question is already a great sign that we're on the right way to really looking at our self-interest from a spiritual perspective, not a material perspective. So I would offer whoever has a question some hope in saying, look, you're halfway there. You're already thinking about it. Good job, you're human. You know?
So I agree with you. That's awesome. But how do you unplug from the matrix? What's your tip to do that? Because we all get caught up in that.
So if we were to get very practical, I can't prescribe for everybody, but I can do what I've seen pointed to me by our older brother, the Christ, which is the reminder that we are immortal and spiritual beings first. I think his entire message, which I think we mislead, is not one of pain and suffering at the cross.
I agree.
It's one of, he came back to show that life goes on. If anything else is a message of joy, because he came to show us that we are going to survive this life. Therefore, our emphasis should be on gathering those treasures that he said we should be interested. So we should be focusing on the spiritual piece. That's clear, I think, for me. The problem is, how do we get there? And I think repetition and talking to people like we're doing here, going to the Spiritist Center and reminding ourselves on a weekly basis is a way to build that habit. Because we've got to build the habit to be able to rely on it. Talk to other people, get different perspectives. Today we're having a little bit of an example of that. We have people here with different backgrounds doing different insights into the same topic, right? We had Adrian talking about law, right? We had Edward chiming in from a very, like, both musical, but at the same time, very engineering-like perspective, right? We have Suzana bringing her passion and her insights to this. So it's beautiful to see that the different perspectives will help us settle in our brains this reality. So repetition, I think, for me is key. And that's why I think Spiritism has changed my life, because it has given me the opportunity, along with all of you guys, to keep talking about this, keep reminding myself about this. And that has been raising the level of importance in my brain. So keep studying, keep working, keep talking, and it will come as second nature.
Keep calm, you are evolving, right? Keep calm, you are evolving. So we have to put that into perspective too. When I was talking, I said, evil is going to disappear entirely when we become pure spirit in the celestial worlds, which I didn't even talk about. So we're going to deal with those struggles through a long time. It's a journey. It will take many and many incarnations, and I agree with you 100%. It's a matter of investing in this belief of immortality. And when I say that, if I ask any one of you, do you believe that you're immortal spirit? You will say, yes, for sure. Do you live as a mortal spirit? I doubt it. I doubt it. And so it's not about believing. It's about being able to moment, to live as such. And that requires that we continue to talk about it, and that requires that we continue to try. The most important thing is that we should never lose hope and persevere.
Thank you so much. Peter, we have another one for you. As it pertains to that book I believe you recommended, the Parenting Handbook. The question is, do you have any examples of how to incorporate lessons from that book into our weekly Gospel at Home, please?
One of the lessons. Can you hear me? Yeah,
yes.
There we go. One of the lessons in the parents' book is a technique called reflective listening, where when we're talking with somebody, we really make an effort to hear where that person's coming from and actually say something back to that person that demonstrates that we actually heard what they said. Because sometimes when people are not communicating so well, it's because they're not really listening to each other. And so reflective listening is a technique that this book talks about. And you can certainly do this with your kids. You want to get through to your children, for instance, but at the same time, you want to try to understand where your children are coming from and why they think what they think, or why they feel the way they feel, and why they did whatever it is they may have done. But you can also do this with adults too. Sometimes two adults will, one of them will be complaining and doesn't feel like he or she's really being heard. And so it helps if we actually listen to the other person and take in what they're saying.
Thank you so much. This is my invitation now to any or all of you, are there any thoughts as we wrap up the last couple of minutes that you don't think we've hit on, or you'd like to reiterate, a takeaway for each of us, from perhaps from your talk specifically? Maybe we'll just start with you and just go around. Is there one thing that you would say, if you don't remember anything else, remember this?
I think one of the things for me that was very enlightening when I was researching my talk was this idea that we don't really understand God's designs. We're still very imperfect spirits to really understand the plan that He has for us and He has for the world. But even so, God doesn't leave us abandoned. He uses our ignorance. He uses our blindness to cause us to act, to be co-creators in the universe, because that is the incentive that we have to fix things, to innovate, to learn, and to strive to be better. And so even though it may seem sometimes that we're this, as Danielle says, this blue chariot out in the galaxies, we're never alone. And God always finds a way to use our imperfection to better us.
Thank you. How about you, Peter? Anything you'd like to remind us of or emphasize?
In the example I gave about reincarnation, I would just add to all of that that was just really one example. And one of the, what I've heard in the study groups that I do at my center, a phrase that gets used over and over again is that every case is a case, meaning that everyone's journey is unique and pertains to that particular individual, that particular spirit. And so whatever it is we need to learn or go through in our spiritual evolution is unique. And that's part of what makes life really exciting, and also part of what makes the journeys that occur within any particular family very different and unique from another family. And that I would say it's a big mistake with reincarnation to sort of adapt a one-size-fits-all. And what I mean by that is sometimes you might hear people, sometimes you might hear people say something like, well, if you did such and such in a prior incarnation, therefore such and such is going to happen to you as a result. Well, maybe, maybe not, but who knows? Because again, there's so many nuances that go into what makes up a spirit and the journey of that spirit that it's hard to know for sure what's really going to happen. And as far as worrying about who did what, where, and when, well, that's a level of air traffic control that I personally don't feel a great need to participate in. So,
Thank you so much. And for the rest of our speakers, I apologize. I've taken us beyond time, and we need to stop there. But thank you so much for your contribution today. We really appreciate it.